So this morning I've come out to a spot on the east side here where there's some really cool sandstone textures. A lot of ripples, and just kind of flowing lines where lines converge in the sandstone. It's really cool looking. But what I'm working with here is a spot where some of the sandstone's got a bunch of different colorations to it. So there's reds, there's yellows, and a little bit of like kind of whitish tones going on here. It's also on an incline where there's all these lines and sandstones, like steps, are just kind of like sprawling out across composition. As you might have picked up on here, I like lines and repeating textures. And I'm pointing straight at the ground again. I just like the perspective, looking straight down. And so I've matched my plane of focus to kind of follow this incline here and try to get as much of it, in plane as I can. But then, of course, there's steps, so there's depth of field to worry about here too. Right behind me here, there's a cottonwood tree that's shedding its leaves. And they're falling all over the side of the sandstone face here, and all over the place. So I've included one of those cottonwood leaves here in the composition. Now, of course, I did compose this. Of course I did. But I'm not trying to be too contrived here. It was just literally right over here. I just picked it up and moved it over here and put it in my composition. I don't really have a problem doing that. I'm not out here trying to shoot for Nat Geo or something, I'm out here trying to, express a creative vision. So hopefully you're okay with that. If not, no worries. I don't do it all the time. But I picked this time of day as well because this whole cliff face above me is lit up in sunlight right now, and it's bouncing light down, and everything here is just kind of a glow. Not super strong, but it is present. I've taken one exposure already on Velvia 50, just to help kind of pull out all those colors, is what I'm hoping for. But I'm waiting here on the other side of my film holder here. I have another sheet ready, and I'm waiting because the sun's slowly creeping down the side of this hill face. I'm gonna wait till it gets, not when I'm in direct sunlight, but when it gets just about as much light as I can possibly get. I'm going to hit the shutter and take the next exposure and see what the differences are. It's fairly easy to meter this one. A lot of these scenes are like this on the ground. I just stuck a gray card right on the ground and just metered off of that. That gives you your middle tone. And other than that, it's just a case of trying to make sure that you get your focus plane to match, this hillside the best you can so that the corner sharpness is there. And then I stopped down to f32. Technically it was f22 and 2/3. That's just what my exposure worked out to be. But that small aperture should give me enough extended depth of field to get everything perfectly sharp here. We're only talking maybe 3/4 to an inch of depth here in the scene, but it's enough to where I need that extended depth of field, especially with as close as I am focused to the ground. Now it's just a waiting game, waiting for this light to come down closer to my composition. I'll be constantly taking meter readings to make sure that my exposure hasn't changed, and then I'll fire off that other shot.
Here is the first exposure I had just taken after recording that, and the second taken afterwards. Fair to say that the left-hand exposure is quite a bit darker, and that's because I forgot to compensate for bellows extension. Fortunately, I realized that mistake in the field, so I was able to correct for it and then take the second exposure. I was happy with the way that the lines in this image all kind of fan out from the bottom left corner. In the cottonwood leaf, I placed intentionally so they would point into the composition, and the general direction it points is perpendicular to the overall flow of the sandstone lines above it. Of course, Velvia went absolutely nuclear with the blues in this image. And while that's not what the reality actually looked like, it is what the film recorded. And in this case, I actually really kind of liked it, being such an abstract photo to begin with anyway. So rather than try to fight it and pull all the blue color cast out, I decided to embrace it and just enjoy it for how bizarre and colorful it really is. It's understandable that not everyone's going to enjoy this photo or agree with me on the direction I went with the edit. But I'm definitely curious as ever to know what your thoughts are. So here's my edit, and I look forward to your comments down below.
I didn't make it very far. I'm actually under the same cottonwood tree that's been dropping leaves for the last composition. But just underneath it, there's some really cool mud ripples down here that are still wet. And leaves have fallen down on top of these. Now, I didn't compose this one. This one's a natural find. I try to be really open about disclosing when I do that kind of stuff, manipulate the scene and stuff. But in this case, it would have been really hard to do that because anything you do to disturb this would have shown in the mud. It's really pristine looking, so I didn't want to touch it. So I'm shooting it as is, which is giving me a little bit of compositional trouble, because of course I couldn't just go in there and monkey with it. There's a couple other leaves around it that I'm trying to disinclude. I actually got the stem or the stime of one leaf on the very edge. That's kind of creeping in. I might have to clean it up later. And I may do some cropping and post, on this because I just can't quite get exactly the framing I wanted. But I think I got something really good. I like the way the form and flow of all of these ripples, and I think it looks really cool. But I got the same light source behind me, this big, huge sandstone cliff that's, reflecting light down into the scene, just warming it up and giving me a bunch of highlights. But there's a sheen to this mud, and that's kind of what attracted me to it. Super smooth looking with this sheen to it. That's just this warm glow from reflected light. Possibly a little different than some of the other shots you might have seen of mud ripples like this, because this one looks kind of more almost plastic. It's kind of interesting looking, but the more I looked at it, the more fascinated I was by it, so I decided I did want to shoot it. It looks like on the very top of my composition, there's some of these little ridges in here that have frozen overnight. That's the only thing I can figure, because there's all these little frost-lined little cracks up there. It looks really cool. I don't know if it adds anything to the composition, but it's interesting to look at. A little bit of an awkward tripod pose here. Actually, I had to use a rock to weigh my tripod down so it doesn't tip, because I kept bumping into it and it was trying to fall in the wash. But because of my awkward positioning here, I had to use a little bit of front tilt to match my plane of focus across the ground, and just a little bit of swing to make sure that I'm following the grade, because this is flowing downhill. But I've exposed 2 sheets of Pro V100F on this one, and those were f32 1/3, 1 second, both those exposures. Had to count 1 extra third of a stop for bellows extension. And just once again, just metering right off the gray card. These small scenes are really easy to do that, so the metering is pretty simple, straightforward. Like I said, a little different take on these kind of mud ripple things. We'll see once I get the film back, see if I actually like it or not. I think it looks good on the ground glass. I think the textures look cool. But in any case, here's those film sheets, and let me know, as always, what you think.
I gotta say, I think the warm to cool contrast here turned out exactly the way I was hoping it would. The cool tones and the shadows of the ripples are balanced out perfectly by the highlights, where the shiny parts of the mud are reflecting back the warm tones of the sandstone that lit it. It's hard to communicate on camera, but there's a 3D quality to it while looking at it on a light table. There are a few distractions in the photo, however, like this stick at the top of the composition, and the little clumps of dirt that collected into the lowest parts of the ripples. On closer inspection with the loop, these bright green specks are actually dead bugs, so I'm going to have to decide how much image cleanup is in order. But overall, I was happy with the way these exposures turned out. Maybe not your typical sand ripple shot you'd see out of Zion, but certainly a very graphically interesting scene, and one that I'm happy to have in my collection. But here's my edit, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.
So I've come across the scene in the wash here. It's got a group of smaller maple trees. They've all turned yellow. It seems like the maples every year have kind of had, theme to the color that they transition to. And this year it seems like it's been mostly dark oranges and reds. Last year was a lot of yellows. That's kind of what, it's kind of a throwback to last year, it seems like. But I'm up against a sandstone cliff here. It's got some cool textures and potholes in it, and some lichens and stuff in it. Looks really good. But on the opposite side of the wash here, I got some more sandstone that's reflecting light into this scene. So I've got just a little bit of reflected light. Not a ton, because some high clouds have moved in. So there's quite a bit of cloud activity up in the sky. So it's not quite blue skies. Still, I'm shooting Velvia 50 on this, and I'm pretty sure it's probably going to go a little blue in the shadows. I'm actually kind of counting on it. I'm not going to use any warming filters or anything on this, because what I'm hoping for is with all the highlights that are really warm. There's a lot of warm tones in this scene. So if the shadows go a little cool, that's totally fine. That actually might look really neat. But I've switched to the 6x12 back. I'm shooting with my 150mm Nikon. W, the 5.6 lens. Gives me a nice 6x12 panorama of just these limbs of these trees and then the sandstone in the background. Now, of course, the lens on my camera isn't that much further from the trees than the trees are from the wall behind it. And just by physics, that means that the background is going to be really tough to get completely in focus. Even though I stopped down to f32 on this lens, the depth of field just isn't going to quite extend that far back. And that's okay, because the focal point really is the leaves, the brighter, warm objects in the foreground. Now, I did angle the camera a little bit to kind of correct for the fact that the branches that I'm photographing aren't the main trunks, so they don't go straight up. They're kind of sticking out like this. But the majority of them in this grouping here are all leaning the same direction, as well as this crack in the wash behind me. So if I go ahead and turn the camera just a little bit to line those up so that it looks visibly straight, or straighter. They're not 100% straight because, of course, they're trees. They're not, man-made objects or something. I'm also looking up with the camera. So my focus plane is trying to match the fact that these branches are kind of leaning into the wash. So I've been trying to compensate for that. It's a little tough to focus. There's so much chaos here. It's where do you focus at? Well, for me, I'm just focusing on the main branch. So at the bottom of my composition and the top of the composition, the center branch, the most center branch, I'm just looking to make sure that top to bottom, that they're in focus. That tells me that my plane of focus is mostly relatively where I want it. And then just relying on depth of field to kind of capture the rest of it to be acceptably sharp. It won't all be pin sharp, and that's okay. Otherwise, I've been really fortunate to have this little area of the wash here just absolutely still the whole time I've been shooting. So I've went ahead and exposed 2 exposures on this. They were 1 second at f32. And that's about it. It's pretty straightforward. It seems like kind of a nice find. It's one of those things where you just walk right past and don't even pay attention to if you don't stop and try to put a rectangle on it and see if there's anything there. And sure enough, I decided to shoot it. So hopefully these exposures turn out. But in any case, here's a film. And as always, let me know what you think down in the comments.
I was really happy with the way that Velvia handled this scene, and it seemed to go just about exactly the way I had predicted in the field that it might. The warm tones of the maple leaves seemed to pull forward, while the bluish tint in the lichens and the rock in the background helped it recede towards the back. Although looking at this now, right side up, I kind of wish in the field I would have shifted the camera just ever so slightly to the right, as the 3 tree trunks, as well as the crack in the background, are all dominant subjects that I was intentional about making sure were evenly spaced, but the entire grouping is just a little bit off-center. But that's an easy fix in post with the crop tool. The sharpness in the leaves turned out more than acceptable, and the slight softness of the background helps it separate from the leaves beautifully. In a digital world full of instant feedback, it's easy to take for granted that what you see on the screen is what you're going to get. But in the moment, you only have what you visualize in your mind while you're shooting film. And while my boxes of film often come back from the lab with plenty of surprises, it certainly feels good once in a while when I get it right. The only thing left is to decide if I even like the photo, and I think I do. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts, so here's my edit, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Special thanks to my Patreon patrons, and if you'd like to know how you can help support this channel, make sure you check out those links in the description down below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you can let me know by hitting that thumbs up button down below, and maybe consider subscribing if you want to make sure you catch the rest of my series with Zion this year. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll catch you in the next episode.